Good morning, Polyphony members. I'm glad to see all of you who could join us live for this particular session today. Tracy DePue is the founder and spiritual director for Inside Out Spiritual Living, and she received her training in spiritual direction from the Perkins School of Theology and currently walks alongside individuals from many parts of the United States as they seek to deepen their connection with God, self, others, and creation. Prior to becoming a spiritual director, Tracy served for over 25 years in full-time music ministry at Grace Presbyterian Church in Plano, Texas, and St. James United Methodist Church in Little Rock, Arkansas. While serving as a pastoral musician, Tracy contributed to the greater church music community by serving on the boards for a number of church music-related organizations and serving as clinician for youth choirs and handbells at summer conferences for various organizations. She currently resides in Little Rock and will complete the level 1 training to become a practitioner of the internal family systems model, our topic for today. This model helps individuals learn to build trust and love between themselves and their parts. In doing so, they can learn to love themselves in a way that leads to loving others more fully. Welcome, Tracy.
Thank you, Kyle. And thank you, Doug, for the invitation to be here today. I'm really glad to be with you and to get to see your faces and to know more about your organization and how you're supporting each other in your ministry. And I'm really delighted to be here to do and help participate in that effort by sharing a little bit about internal family systems. And as soon as I said that, a part in me said sharing a lot about internal family systems. And so I'm going to try to share my screen and do all the things here. So let me pull this up. And oops. So I'm just going to ask Kyle, are you seeing that okay? Just to be sure. You're muted.
Sorry, Tracy. I was just saying we see your screen, but we see that it's still loading, correct?
Oh, I can see the slide, so you're not seeing. Oh, so let's see, it's paused. Oh, resume share, I see. Let's see how this goes. So it's still on.
Yes, now we can see.
Is it just the main screen? Is it just the one slide?
No, we're seeing all the
things.
All the things. Yeah.
Okay, let's see if I can get this to come. Yeah, every time I open it up to the full thing, it wants to stop. Does somebody know something about that?
I can't give you direction on that, Tracy. I'm sorry, but
Okay.
Perhaps we can just promise not to look at your slides coming. The one that you're on. Look, we'll just promise to keep our eyes focused on the screen that's highlighted.
Okay, so for all its clunkiness, oh, I can fix that. How's that? All right, thanks.
That's working. There you go.
Thanks, Doug. We will make this work. All right. Well, so like I said before, it's just good to be with you and to be able to share about something that I feel is a gift for healing and wholeness, and what I believe God has invited me to learn and to share as a way of helping others heal and learn how to love more fully, both themselves and others. So as we begin this presentation on internal family systems, I'm curious to know who has any experience with IFS, either through reading or work with a therapist or practitioner, or any other prior familiarity with this therapeutic model. So if you want to raise your hands, maybe you can just see each other or see a few people to see if there's any prior knowledge in the group.
I,
No hands. Yeah.
Randy Britton raised his hand. I think Randy's the only one in this current group here
Okay. Thank
on the
you.
live chat here. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. So for our purposes today, I'm going to give you a lot of information about a complex system, your internal family system. And while it's a lot, and we're going to kind of skim the surface a bit, please know that you can come back to this recording and spend more time with that. Stop it, take a look at the slides, and you can begin to bring your own exploration of the various resources and information. So there's no shortage of any of that. So as Kyle mentioned, I'm currently in level 1 training, and when asked how to share a simple explanation of internal family systems, the lead trainer shared the quote at the bottom of the screen. Internal family systems is a way of making friends with the parts of us that are causing trouble in our lives. And it has a beautiful way of bringing a spiritual resource. And I'll add, that's our self, our true essence, our true self is the spiritual resource to these parts and helping them heal. So what if in the most stressful moments of life, you had more access to a sense of inner calm, confidence, and clarity? And what if you began learning about that critical voice inside, which led to a journey towards some healing? And what if the healing changed the purpose of that critical voice such that it transformed into an encourager for you and for others? As we explore this evidence-based therapeutic model today, we'll begin to see how these questions are addressed through the process of beginning to get acquainted with your internal family. So since the time you were born, you've been a unique spark of the divine. You were created good and whole, complete. My guess is we all love babies. There's a freshness and innocence, and when we're around them, we notice some qualities, such as curiosity. As they begin looking around at people and things, this curiosity leads them into courage. They desire to get closer to what has generated their curiosity. So they try to roll over or sit up and walk. And even when they don't quite get there or they fall down, they get up and try again. They don't experience shame or ridicule. They feel the connection that comes from those who are cheering them on, and the connection within them that somehow, even at this early stage, simply knows that this exploration is leading them to something they already have the capacity for within themselves. These are just some of the qualities that we were born with, and it's important to be reminded that we've had these qualities since the beginning of our lives. This unique spark of the divine is often referred to as our essence, our true self, our imago Dei, the image of God. An image that reflects the fullness of our essence is a diamond with its many facets. There are many parts of our personality, and as we explore our internal family system, we'll discover how our truest self has gotten covered up by parts that are trying to protect us. We'll learn how to unblend from those parts so we can express the fullness of who we are, so that more of our light can shine. If we didn't have facets or subpersonalities which represent our internal family system, we might just be a rock, one thing, one way of being. The common belief that we are one unified mind inside is why we often reduce ourselves or others to their worst or best, when actually we are experiencing a part of ourselves or a part of others. In many ways, we grow up like a tree. In her book, Move Your DNA, biomechanist Katie Bowman says, Trees are shaped by the wind. Tree genetics specify the primary shape and color and texture of a tree. These genetically determined outcomes help a biologist classify a tree as a redwood or a manzanita, but it is the movement of a tree, specifically the all-day, everyday stimulation created by wind, that dictates the girth of a tree's trunk and branches, as well as how often and at what angles a tree branches. So as we grow, life events begin to shape us, our beliefs, our behavior, and how we see ourselves and the world. And yet, while the shaping comes from the outside, our true self or essence is still intact, even as it gets obscured by pain that comes from life events. These life events can be anything from what we would consider big T trauma, from abuse, to experiences like being ignored or bullied or constantly criticized, anything that caused a deep pain or that we weren't equipped to handle. When the deep pain occurred as a child, we didn't have full access to our true self. We didn't have the self agency required to help in those situations. So a part of us took on a role to help out. And when they took on this role, they began to obscure aspects of the diamond over many years, making it more and more difficult to access our true self. So we'll take a look at getting to know our parts. Our internal family system is composed of our self and parts, both exiles and protectors. So the exiles are our vulnerable parts because the pain or the wound was too much for us to handle. Parts of us took on these roles and the pain got pushed down or exiled as a way for us to cope with life and not be overwhelmed by the pain and sadness. These parts carry the pain, wounds, and beliefs, and they're often young and vulnerable, and we refer to them as exiles. So a few things to know about exiles. As you see here, they are the youngest parts in our system. They absorbed the impact of trauma or attachment injuries of burdens. They're called exiles because the impact of what happened is still on the back burner of their consciousness. Their burdens are experienced implicitly and feel like the truth. And so these burdens come through trauma, attachment injuries or early wounds like critical parenting or absent parents, family, culture, school, places of worship, peer groups, messages that injure our sense of wholeness and goodness, intergenerational and cultural legacies that transmit wounds, and the internalization of shame and guilt from those messages. They become exiled by the parts we refer to as protectors. The protector's main intent is to keep the internal system safe. No matter how extreme they may become in their role, there are no bad parts. The heart of their work is to safeguard the system from the pain of the wounded exile. There are two types of protectors, managers and firefighters. Managers are always on the job, as it says, come rain or shine. They are proactive and future-oriented. Their underlying motivations are protection, prevention, and progress. Managers are loyal, committed, persistent, often responsible for our wonderful achievements in life. They are more in the head space than the heart space. They're oftentimes seen as parent figures or feel like parent figures who want the best for us. Managers learned their jobs early on from parents, other family members, and role models. They are future oriented and are always planning ahead because they are trying to avoid any sense of an exile presence or their pain. Often their motto is never again. And so managers are, and oftentimes we feel like, well, that's just who I am. I do this and I do this. The roles managers have in our lives are typically considered to be desirable and rewarded by our culture. So people often over identify with their managers. Others also mistake our managers for us. Like Jeff is so great at hospitality, or Yolanda is such a great organizer. The primary function of managers is to keep us feeling secure by controlling people, events, and other parts. They help manage day-to-day life and are socially adaptive, helping us fit in and be valued by doing, pleasing, and performing as a way to prevent rejection and pain. Managers prevent vulnerability by constructing protective fortresses and maintaining control. Managers mean well, but they can often create imbalance, especially when they begin to work from a sense of obsession, compulsion, or impulsiveness. This shows up when they get stuck in a loop like a hamster wheel, can't seem to stop, and they're running but not getting anywhere. They sometimes cause what they try to prevent, like trying to prevent rejection, and their actual actions actually causing that very rejection. They trigger the exile's pain. They trigger polarization with other parts. A part of me wants to do this, another part of me wants to do that. And they oftentimes feel exhausted or unsatisfied with their results. So here's a list of common managers. There are more, and sometimes the managers are unique to us and our stories, but I'm going to invite you just to glance down the list to see if anything seems familiar to you. And then maybe write down one or two, or the ones that sort of feel like you might have a connection with those parts. The other protector is called a firefighter. And firefighters are reactive. They're impulsive and spring into action, attempting to extinguish the flames of emotion happening on the inside of us. They try to take us far away from our present centered embodied state of self, especially in times of danger. Firefighters are less socially acceptable than managers and will do whatever it takes to get away from the exile's pain, regardless of the impact on the physical body or relationships. They can even overpower our managers' efforts to control the system. So here are some common firefighters. And you'll notice that these are somewhat strategies, and many of them are what we would consider numbing strategies. And then in the very most extreme situations are the very last ones, the suicidal and the homicidal parts. So take a moment to look over this list and see if there are any patterns that you recognize as soothing or numbing when emotions run high, things that you tend to lean toward. In the IFS family, we use this word trailhead as a way to recognize when some part has shown up, that it's the beginning of a conversation that we might have with that part. And so uh, Trailheads are when something comes up that throws you out of your sense of true self. So parts signal their presence through any of the following trailheads: thoughts, feelings, sensations, memories, inner voices. That might be the most familiar, the chatter in our heads, that voice that tells us stuff. Words, images, dreams, even physical symptoms, all kinds of physical symptoms, and felt sense, how the body is feeling, how you're feeling that in the body. So we've talked about exiles and the two protectors, managers and firefighters. So here's just a little scenario about how those might all be experienced in one simple example. So let's say it's a new year, like it is, and you feel like you really should make a New Year's resolution to add an exercise class to your weekly schedule. So you do, and you start out doing really well until you begin to notice how much stronger and faster the other people are. Your self-consciousness begins to bring up negative feelings and you start sleeping in and skipping the class. Eventually, you stop going. And as you do, shame kicks in and begins making you feel worse for stopping. So here we notice the part that insisted you do something to improve your health, the part that became self-conscious by comparing you to others, which ended up inviting you to sleep in, skip class, and eventually quit altogether. And the shaming part that came up to make you feel bad about, yet again, not fulfilling a New Year's resolution. I don't know about you, but that's a really familiar pattern that I recognize from my own life. I've done that. So it feels like a really good one for us to go, oh, yeah. I recognize that pattern. It was the discovery of these various types of parts that began Richard Schwartz's exploration of the internal system. He was doing work with people with eating disorders in the early 1980s and began noticing the parts language of his clients. His clients would say, a part of me eats, and then there is a part of me that is ashamed, so I purge, and then I feel bad about that, so I eat more. It's a vicious cycle. His work with family systems gave him a framework for what seemed to be the same experience, only happening on the inside. Over time, as they would explore these various parts, Schwartz asked a client, what part is that? And she said, oh, that's not a part, that's just me. And that's when he realized that along with these other parts, there was a self that was there, that was present. He discovered that the self is the core essence in each one of us that is good and is undamaged by any trauma or experience. That the self has healing gifts and that it is the seat of consciousness and is the leader of the internal family system. When working with clients, he began to help them unblend from the parts, learn the stories about the parts, find the exile and heal it, and then begin unburdening the parts from these old roles that they had to protect the system. In doing this, the exiles and protectors were transformed into wholeness. And oftentimes they took on affirming and helpful roles to help their previous, or kept their previous one, but with a new intent. So here are some basic assumptions of IFS that Richard Schwartz laid out in his work. It is the nature of the mind to be subdivided into an indeterminate number of subpersonalities or parts. And for many, that's a radical consideration. Everyone has a self, and the self can and should lead the individual's internal system. The non-extreme intention of each part is something positive for the individual. So there are no bad parts. And the goal of therapy or guiding practitioners is not to eliminate parts, but instead to help them find their non-extreme roles. As we develop, our parts develop and form a complex system of interactions among them. Therefore, systems theory can be applied to the internal system. When the system is reorganized through the healing, parts can change rapidly. And changes in the internal system will affect changes in the external system, and vice versa. So the overall goals of IFS are to achieve balance and harmony within the internal system, to differentiate and elevate the self so it can be an effective leader in the system. When the self is in the lead, the parts will provide input to the self, but will respect the leadership and ultimate decision-making of the self. All parts will exist and lend talents that reflect their non-extreme intentions. This idea of a multiple mind or subpersonalities is not new, but as you might imagine, Schwartz was highly ostracized for his work by his colleagues in the psychology world. It took him a good 20 years before he could begin the testing process that has led to the IFS model becoming evidence-based. Today, the demand for training by therapists and practitioners is so great that there's a waiting list of over 8,000 people trying to learn this model. The self, with a capital S, is a different level of entity than the other parts that have been discussed. Often in the center of the you that the parts are talking to. Your true self, your core essence. The self is the healer. So even in the therapy space or the practicing guide space, it is the client, it is you who does the healing. You're just invited into that space by the person that might be helping you or guiding you. When differentiated from parts or unblended from the parts, the self is competent, secure, self-assured, relaxed, and able to listen and respond to feedback. Often, when completely differentiated from all parts or unblended, people describe a feeling of being centered. So how does it feel to be in self? When we are unblended from our parts, we experience more of an open-hearted presence, more of our core essence, and a more embodied attention within. We also sense within us a knowing voice and inherent wisdom, awe, more gratitude, deeper love, inner peace and calm, more connection with all life, and a deep felt sense of radiating energy. So as clients experienced more unblending from their parts and healing occurred, Schwartz noticed that among all the clients, they consistently exhibited these qualities. They are referred to as the 8 C's: curiosity, compassion, clarity, calm, creativity, courage, connectedness, and confidence. Personally, I like to notice when I'm experiencing any of these qualities as a way to remind me of what being in self feels like. The more I recognize it, the more I have a sense of who I was created to be. And I can look for spaces and people to be in and around that enable me to experience that more fully. The inner work of accessing more of the healing self energy is the key to unblending with parts, healing exiles, and unburdening protectors, ultimately finding unity and balance in my internal family system. The impact of the IFS model is that it is a path for self-love by providing tools for healing and unburdening various parts within us. In this tool, I believe we are being invited to be Christ for our parts. Doing the soul work with your internal family system creates stronger self-leadership, helps create unity within, like an ecosystem or a choir and its conductor. So notice the picture to the right. It's a picture of somebody's parts. You see all the variety of what they look like, but in the middle is the conductor leading that group. And the more our parts feel seen and heard, by us as the leader, the more they will let us see and hear and know about them. As we begin to develop more trusting relationships with our parts, we begin to extend that compassion and curiosity to those around us. This tool we use to develop more love for our parts and ourselves teaches us how to extend that compassion and curiosity to others. This has global implications, I believe. And this is how we begin to truly love others as we love ourselves. So what's next? If your curiosity is piqued and you're wondering what some next steps might be, here are some to consider. Begin getting to know your parts by catching them in the act. After seeing a list of managers and firefighters, you may already have a few that are activated. And I imagine most of you have had a few chatting away in you during this presentation. So take note, they are interested in connecting with you and they want to be seen and heard. Read more about IFS and begin doing the slow and intentional work of building trust between you and your parts. Work with an IFS therapist or practitioner. You can find out who has been trained in IFS through the Find a Professional tab on the IFS Institute. So I'm going to stop sharing here and just say that I've created a resource page, which Kyle will distribute to you in whatever way he does that. And there's an IFS Institute link on there. There's some books listed, some podcasts to consider for deeper dive into IFS. And note that any book of Richard Schwartz's will be less expensive on the IFS Institute page than at other retailers. This morning I thought about that. Oh yes, just want to tell you that. And then to coincide with my level 1 training, I decided in August to offer 100 free IFS sessions to help others and to provide me with much needed practice. And so I have about 35 sessions still available. And so there's information on that resource page on how to contact me about that at the bottom of the page if you're interested in taking advantage of that. And so the best way I know to have an experience is to invite you into a short meditation to begin having some firsthand experience with your parts. And so I'm going to invite you to find a comfortable position and let your body settle the way it knows how to settle. And if you're comfortable, closing your eyes to go in and do that, or just soften your gaze. And I'll invite you to begin focusing on your breath, this gift of life, this gift of the spirit that enters and leaves us all day long, this ever-present presence. And begin allowing the abdomen to relax so that you can begin deepening the breath, expanding the in-breath. And as you do, notice the coolness of the breath as it enters the body, whether through the nose or the mouth. And then how it is warm as it leaves the body. This all day in and out, coolness to warmth transformation of the breath, mostly without us even giving it much consideration. We give thanks for the gift of this breath, this gift of life. Now I invite you to do a scan of your body and your mind, noticing any particular thoughts, emotions, sensations, or impulses that stand out. And as you do that, see if one of those emotions, thoughts, sensations, or impulses is calling to you. Maybe it seems to want your attention. And if so, then try to focus on it exclusively for a minute and see if you can notice where it seems to be located in, on, or around your body. And as you focus on it, notice how you feel toward it. By that, I mean, do you dislike it? Does it annoy you? Are you afraid of it? Do you want to get rid of it? Do you depend on it? So we're just noticing that you have a relationship with this thought, emotion, sense, or impulse. And if you feel anything besides a kind of openness or curiosity toward it, then ask the parts of you that might not like the one you're focused on, or are afraid of it, or have any other extreme feeling about it to just relax inside and give you a little space to get to know it without an attitude. And if you can't get to that curious place, that's okay. You could spend time just talking to the parts of you that don't want to relax about their fears about letting you actually interact with the target emotion, thought, sensation, or impulse. But if you can get into that mindfully curious place relative to that target part, then it is safe to begin to interact with it. And that might feel a bit odd to you at this point, but just give it a try. And do that by focusing on this emotion, impulse, thought, or sensation. And notice it in your body. Ask it if there's something it wants you to know, and then wait for an answer. Don't think of the answer. So many thinking parts can relax too. So any thinking parts can relax. Just wait silently with your focus on the place in your body until an answer comes. Is there something it wants you to know? And if you get an answer, then as a follow up question, you can ask what it's afraid would happen if it didn't do this inside of you. What's it afraid would happen if it didn't do what it does? And if it answered that question, then you probably learned something about how it's trying to protect you. If that's true, then see if it's possible to extend some appreciation to it for at least trying to keep you safe and see how it reacts to your appreciation. Then ask this part of you what it needs from you in the future. What does it need from you in the future? And then take a moment to thank your parts for whatever they allowed you to do. Let them know that this isn't their last chance to have a conversation with you because you'd like to get to know them more. And then when the time feels right in whatever way is comfortable for you, shift your focus back to the outside and notice more of your surroundings. And now as we move into a time for Q&A, take time to write down what part or parts showed up, maybe what part you may have focused on or where you noticed it in your body or how it responded to your questions. Anything that you'd like to remember about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy.
Yeah, so I see there's a couple of questions down in the chat. Let's see. Um, so Randy's asking, how did you find your way to internal family systems therapy? Thanks, Randy. My cousin is a therapist, and she's been using IFS in her practice for about 4 years. And she just wanted to talk about it. We've just gotten closer in the last few years, about 4 years ago. And so we started reading books and she started teaching me about it. And then as soon as she started teaching me about IFS and I started reading, I started noticing parts in spiritual direction sessions with people. And so I would just sort of, as a side thing on my piece of paper, I would just write down the parts that I was noticing showing up. Sometimes that would invite us into a conversation, sometimes not. So over time, I felt like there was this lane that sort of showed up, inviting me to do more with internal family systems. And last year, I decided I would do a deep dive. And last week, as I was kind of reviewing the year, I was writing down all the courses and training that I'd done for the year. And I was startled to see that every month last year, I was in some type of training situation and then applied, or it's a lottery system to get into the training. And so I put my name in the hopper and I got it on the first try, and my cousins tried for years to get in. And I said, I'm so sorry. She said, no, I'm delighted that you got it. And so now I have a new spiritual director supervisor who is a level 2 certified IFS practitioner. And so I decided I wanted to work with him, and he was gracious to let me, so that I don't know how all this will all merge together, but I feel like that's the direction I've been led. So I'm just going there. And I find it to be this most healing modality. And sort of feel like there's a sense of urgency to share this with people so that they can find healing. Yeah. Is there anything else about that you wanted to ask about, Randy?
No, I don't think so. I was introduced to it through the Insight Timer app. I don't know if anybody knows that app. It's a meditation and mindfulness app. It's called Insight Timer. And Richard Schwartz has probably 10 or 12 sessions on there introducing the IFS model. And I probably was listening to that maybe 3 years ago and introduced to it, and then read one of his books. And it's been very helpful to me, in these last 2 or 3 years, because I've always had these different parts. And I could really, even without knowing this model, I could kind of identify them. And so it's been extremely helpful to me. And then it piqued my interest when I knew that we were going to be doing this today with you. And so I started had not purchased it, but started listening to the audiobook of Richard Swartz. His big book is called Internal Family Systems Therapy, the second edition.
Uh-huh.
And it's really, really, I have a commute to a church of about 50 minutes. And so I listen to that audiobook going down and coming back. And I've also gotten the ebook also so that I can kind of follow along. But it's, I can't say enough about it. It has been extremely helpful to me. And it's kind of, it jogged my memory about it, the 3 weeks since we knew we were going to be doing this. And so I've gotten back into it, and I'm even in more of a place where it's helpful.
That's great. Thank you. And thank you for the reminder of Insight Timer. I did not put that on the resource page, but I just wrote it on my copy of it because it is a great resource. And if I'm not mistaken, many of them are the ones in his book, No Bad Parts.
Yes, that's right.
So that's really helpful for people who, I have this book, No Bad Parts, which is on the list. And reading it, I didn't do any of the exercises when I read the book because it's too cumbersome. It's really easier to have a guide to invite you into that. And the book that you're referencing, the basic internal family systems therapy book, is a textbook for the course. For the training. So it's a really heady book, but
it's a textbook for a college course.
It is. Absolutely. So that's great. But I love that you're taking that all in, and that it's been so helpful, and it's good for us to hear about that. So thank you.
Tracy,
Yes.
Doug has posed a question there, a statement with a question. Doug, do you want to share that?
Well, I think it's in the chat. This is an older book, Julia Cameron. I don't know if you guys know it, The Artist's Way. I understand her primary impetus was helping writers deal with writer's block in New York many years ago. But I really resonated with her book when I read it at one time. And my big takeaway, and I may have misinterpreted her primary message, was, or one of the big takeaways for me at that time, was one must silence one's inner critic. And I'll add a sidebar to that. I was listening to a podcast by Preet Bharara, one of my favorites. Stay tuned with Preet if you don't know that. Mostly a political commentator, but there was a podcast a year or so ago, and the conversation was about imposter syndrome. And again, I just got to say, it's like, oh wow! I thought, okay, who's been reading my brain or something? But what I'm hearing you say today, and I'm happy for you to correct me, is I hear you say perhaps one ought to have a conversation with the inner critic, and all I got to say to that is yikes. That seems scary. I want the inner critic to be in the next zip code.
So one of the that's all great. That's great. And I
have a feeling we don't have time to unpack my problems.
That's okay, but I have to say
look at all these friends laughing at me.
Like, because they've all got the inner critic. Like that's like one of the most common ones. Everybody's like, tell that thing. And when we're taught meditation practices, we're invited to move all that away, to like thank it for showing up and then pass it on by. And there's even a meditation in Richard Swartz's book about the self on the path, asking all the parts to step back, and you take this little journey by yourself. So that seems a little overlap, but the silencing of a critic is just going to embolden it. I mean, that's why it doesn't go away. It just is relentless, like that dog or the small child. They're just relentless because they want what they want, and they have something they want to be seen and heard ultimately. But what if, in having the conversation with the critic, you discovered that it was protecting you from this pain underneath it? That's an old pain. And through conversation and getting to know it, it would let you have access to it, and that you could actually go in and heal that old pain and actually release it from its burden. And the critic take on some new role because it didn't have the burden of doing that anymore. What would that be like?
I hope that's a rhetorical question.
It's not. It's like, does that seem like what if you really have what if I believe you do have the healing capacity within you to actually do that? Now, part of it is, how do you get to do that? Some of that's with a guide, some of that's reading books and learning some Randy, I'll reference the 6 C's or the 6 F's, the focus. We did a little bit of that today, the finding the part, the focusing on it. How did you feel toward it? So we did a little bit of this work. There's some processes, but in IFS therapy or guide work, somebody would ask you if you wanted to get to know a part. I feel like I'm kind of doing a dating service when I'm walking with people in IFS, just inviting them to ask these parts questions, and I feed the questions to the person, and I'm with them, and they get an answer. And maybe the struggle part is, do they talk to us? Well, they do. We hear them all the time, but we don't normally talk to them except to tell them to go away. So there's room for more. Don't silence them. Let them out and help them heal, and unburden from what they've been doing. Yeah, that's absolutely what Richard Schwartz has found, and it's brilliant to me. I'm a believer, a full believer. Yeah.
One of the most important things that's been helpful to me is to understand that all of these parts are trying to help you. They're there to help you. They're trying their best. They're not they don't understand how it's hurting you, but they're trying to help you. So I got into the habit of, when I would hear that critical voice or hear an anxious voice, of inviting it to come and have a seat and let's have a chat, because ultimately that voice, like that critical voice or the anxious voice, is helping you, is there to help you, maybe to, oh, don't jump into this because it may not be good and you might not be successful. So why don't you just hold back and everything will be fine. So it's really there to help, but it's not helpful. It's ultimately in living your true self. It's not helpful, but it is helpful to know that they're there to help you, and it's okay to have a conversation, because if you try to tamp that voice down, you'll hear it more. It'll get louder and louder and louder.
So I just thought, it's kind of like if you're a parent and you're parenting your children and you want them to not ever encounter anything bad. So you do all this stuff to try to keep them from experiencing that. And then what are you really creating by not letting them deal with it? You're creating a dysfunctional eventual adult, right? I mean, I saw that all the time as a teacher, and still see it, even though I'm not involved in teaching in that way, where you're wanting to block it. Just if I can just keep them sheltered, then they won't have to deal with that. Well, you're not giving them tools. So what I see in discovering the parts is they're like your tools of yourself. And so if you don't have a conversation with them, so to speak, then you're not going to help yourself in the best way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because the more conversation we have with them, the more separation there is from them. And it is in the separation from the part that they begin to see you and yourself. And when they find out, a lot of times they're locked in time and they think you're really young. They don't really think you know how to lead, or they don't even know you're there. And so they're just operating because they've been doing it for a long time. And once they're able to trust your leadership, they're open to try something different that's really positive in the system. So the inner critic could turn into an encourager. And so there's so much hope in that it feels like a really great way to invest in them. Yeah.
Hmm.
Other questions or
That's good.
comments?
Yeah, I think what spoke to I can't say it verbatim, but my words for it are they can overfunction, they can overextend themselves, the parts. That was when you spoke of that in your presentation, Tracy, I was like, okay, that's makes perfect sense in my mind of that they're there, but they don't need to overtake you as we can. Those that overtake me, that doer, that busyness, that pleaser server, and ironically being passive is what I wrote down. So that was my question. How can a doer pleaser also write down passive in that? Does that seem odd to you is what I'm asking, Tracy?
Nothing seems odd. And I try to let the analyzer, I can really overthink something. So I try to let the analyzer thing, because at the bottom of it all, the parts know the answers. So that passive part, it knows why. And so that's why we go in to talk to them. Just ask that passive part. What are you about? What do you want me to know? Even the inner critic, when it comes up, I hear you. I notice you. What would you like me to know? What do you need? What do you need from me right now? So the combination of the parts, anything. Anything. I have a driver part, talks to all the drivers, loves to drive, but talks to all the drivers. Sometimes things you wouldn't repeat out loud to anybody else. And I notice my parts oftentimes speak through my mouth. I can be going along and I am literally talking out loud and I realize, oh, that's a part talking. I should notice that. Like, that's not me, that's my part talking. So blended. So yeah. So just being open to whatever those things are, there's some story there. And it's just interesting that it seems like they're contradicting. And sometimes there are polarized parts that are kind of working against each other too. So that kind of seems like that might be a place to notice as well. Yeah.
Just one last question, and Tracy, just because we spoke about this prior to this session and getting it prepared, the Enneagram, for those that are familiar with Enneagram, how do these two models correlate? Do they correlate? Or are they two separate models, two ways of looking at them, or can they be a part of the dialogue with each other?
They definitely are. I know the Enneagram pretty well, but my cousin knows it really well, and she actually teaches workshops that intertwine both of these models. But
Okay.
if you're familiar with the Enneagram, like I identify as a 9 on the Enneagram. So the wounded message of my childhood is that my presence doesn't matter. Well, let me tell you, my parts are all about that. Your presence doesn't matter. Your presence doesn't matter. So most significantly, if you're familiar with the wounded message of your childhood through your Enneagram number, then there's a place, like my cousin will say she's doing therapy with somebody and she knows their Enneagram numbers. And I typically know the people I work with too. And that will sort of point in a particular direction. So there's definitely a lot of, and I'll say one of the differences between is that there are certainly ideals about how to move into, about what it looks like to be in higher levels of health in the Enneagram. But the internal family system model gives you a path to actually do it. Like that's that's the thing that's, so I think there's a lot to, a lot to do. Chip just had a light bulb go off. So I think we need, if you want to share what that is.
He had an epiphany 5 days after.
Exactly, a week after Epiphany. Just the wounded child part, that, and I've been thinking about, Kyle, I've been thinking about the Enneagram about this too, because my wife is a 1, so she has that constant inner critic, and I don't feel like I have it as strongly. Hers is constant. But when you said that woundedness of our inner child, that was like, oh, okay, that puts it all together and makes complete sense.
Yeah, because these exiles, that's where they picked up the wound from childhood. So however that wound was fashioned in us, because oftentimes when people get to encounter their exile, it'll be a really young part. And so that correlation, I think, is a really important one. And so I'm glad that that's sort of, yes. So it tells you that we've been carrying these wounds for a long time, and these parts have been doing this work for a long time, and they're tired, they're really tired, and they've been doing a good job too, because we're still here. I will say, on that extreme list were the suicidal and homicidal parts, and I don't want to trigger anybody's story, but I'll say I think most of us on some level have had a thought about that before, suicidal wise, without it getting very close to what people think about when they think about suicidal parts. But Dick Schwartz in his book, No Bad Parts, says, are even the suicidal and homicidal parts not bad? Well, if life is really hard and the pain is really deep, we can solve this. We can just be done with it. That sounds like a part trying to help, even though I can't imagine that part on a really deep level, but I can get that that's what that part is about. Trying to put out the fire, trying to put out the pain. That's what that's about. And so that kind of leads me to this other thing of how other people trigger our parts, because they've got parts too. And that's just a great reminder to have compassion and curiosity when someone's coming at you with their stuff. That's really not about you. It's about them. And when we go after somebody else, it's really about us and not them. Like we've gotten triggers. So the triggering is referred to as tormentors. They're mentors, but they're tormentors. And so that really kind of gives you, back to that trailhead, a place to start. When you get really irritated, that's like, oh, I notice you're irritated. What got you irritated? And maybe a particular person does that in you. But that's about something on the inside of you. So just the awareness of how that works in the external world, I think is important too.
Yeah. Especially as pastoral people who we all are here, part of who we are, pastoral musicians. This group is pastoral, being a primary role that we.
Yeah.
Well, this has been really rich. Thank you for everyone's engagement. Tracy, thank you for presenting and your time and offering your time. Also, I'll just repeat that Tracy's offering 35 more.
I have about 35 left. It's changing, as people that I know. And my thing is, I've been doing it with people that I know or I've seen. So I've seen you. If you're, like, I'm not putting that out on the internet because I don't. So I just want some kind of context with people. But yeah, so until they're used up, and then I'll move into a scale of sorts, to a sliding scale to do that work. But would love to do that if anybody would like to do some exploration of their parts.
Okay, thank you. And I'll send the resource page to everyone by email that Tracy put together and along with, and I believe her information's in that sheet too, how to reach her and take advantage of this opportunity if you would like to do so. I'm going to lead us in a benediction, and I decided a continuation from 2022, our last session with Terry York, before we took a break over the holidays during Advent, Christmas, Epiphany seasons. I thought that this benediction that he offered in November to us, a benediction for church musicians, I felt like should be carried over into this new year. And so these are Terry York's words. Terry, who will be retiring from George W. Truett Seminary at Baylor University this May of 2023. And now to you who have been called to sing amid the shouts and cries and slogans, to you who have been called to sing love to hearts full of hate, to sing truth in the cacophony of falsehood, to sing community in the barren places of isolation, to sing peace in the midst of deadly conflict, to sing embrace in the midst of denial. To you, musicians of the song of grace, may God grant always yet another song of courage to be hummed until God's words appear at the time of testing. Amen. Friends, beloved of God, breathe, bless, and be well. Thank you.